The ultimatum. The warning lights bathed the bridge of New Geneva Station in crimson as Captain Sarah Chen studied the tactical display before her. Hundreds of Zephyrian warships had materialized at the edge of the system, their sleek silver hulls gleaming like deadly jewels against the star field. She had seen Zephyrian vessels before, but never in such overwhelming numbers. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Jackson from the communication station, his young face pale but determined. "It's on all frequencies, priority Alpha." Sarah nodded grimly. She knew what this was about. For months, tensions had been building between the expanding human colonies and the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians claimed ancient rights to this sector, though human surveys had found no evidence of previous occupation. Now it seemed they had decided to settle the matter through force. "Put it through," Sarah commanded, straightening her shoulders. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Admiral Crix, his reptilian features marked by the ritual scars of his warrior caste. His golden eyes held the cold confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. "Human vessel," Crix began, his translator rendering his hissing speech into crisp standard. "I am Admiral Crix of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. You have encroached upon sovereign Zephyrian territory. Your presence here violates the ancient laws of this sector." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Admiral, our surveys show no prior claim to this system. We've established New Geneva Station here legally under Galactic Council regulations." A sound that might have been laughter emerged from Crix's throat. "The Galactic Council recognizes might, human, and we possess overwhelming might. Observe." The tactical display updated, showing the true scale of the Zephyrian fleet. Over 300 ships of various classes, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, had taken position around the station. "You have 1 standard hour to evacuate your station and withdraw from this system," Crix continued. "Comply, and you will be permitted to leave with your lives. Resist, and you will be destroyed. This is the way of things. All species understand this truth." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Sarah looked around at her crew of 43 souls: engineers, scientists, security personnel, and support staff who had volunteered for this remote posting. They weren't soldiers, but they were humans. "Captain," came the voice of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief scientist, over the intercom. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships. Their firepower could reduce us to atoms in minutes." "Acknowledged, Doctor," Sarah replied. She turned to her tactical officer, Commander Miguel Torres, a former Earth Defense Force veteran who had joined the colonial service seeking a quieter life. "Miguel, what are our options?" Torres studied his console, his weathered face grim. "Honestly, Captain, against that kind of firepower, standard defensive protocols would last maybe 10 minutes. But," he paused, a familiar glint entering his eyes, "standard protocols assume we're playing by their rules." Sarah felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "Go on." "Well, New Geneva isn't just a station. We're built into the asteroid field here for a reason. We've got mining charges, industrial equipment, fabrication units, and humans have always been good at improvising." Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled over the comm again. "Captain, if I may add something, I've been studying Zephyrian psychology and tactics. They're a rigid species, hierarchical. They expect their enemies to follow predictable patterns. They expect surrender when faced with overwhelming odds because that's what every other species does. But we're not every other species, are we?" Sarah said softly. "No, Captain," Torres replied with growing enthusiasm. "We're humans, and humans don't know when to quit." Sarah activated the station-wide communication system. Her voice echoed through every corridor, every laboratory, every living space on New Geneva Station. "Attention all personnel. This is Captain Chen. As you're aware, we're facing the significant threat. The Zephyrian fleet is demanding our surrender and withdrawal from this system." She paused, letting the weight of the situation sink in. "I won't lie to you. The odds are against us. But I want you to know that surrender is not mandatory. Each of you volunteered to be here, to push the boundaries of human space, to explore and build something new. That pioneering spirit is what makes us human. If anyone wishes to evacuate, the escape pods are ready. I'll transmit our surrender and buy you time to reach the neutral zone. But if you choose to stay, we're going to show these Zephyrians something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what happens when you corner a species that doesn't know how to give up." The responses came quickly. Not a single evacuation request. Instead, reports began flooding in from every department. Chief Engineer Kowalski had ideas about weaponizing the mining equipment. Dr. Vasquez was already working on countermeasures for Zephyrian targeting systems. Even the cafeteria staff were volunteering to help prepare defensive positions. 30 minutes before the deadline, Sarah sent her response to Admiral Crix. The Zephyrian's golden eyes widened slightly as her message played. "Admiral Crix, this is Captain Chen of New Geneva Station. We have considered your generous offer." Sarah's tone was polite, even cheerful. "After careful deliberation, our response is as follows. No, we're not leaving. This is our home now, and we're staying. If you want us gone, you'll have to come and take us." The silence that followed stretched across space like a held breath. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Crix stared at the screen in bewilderment. In over 2 decades of military service, he had never received such a response. Species faced with certain annihilation simply didn't refuse surrender. It defied logic, survival instinct, and every military precedent he knew. "Sir," his tactical officer inquired hesitantly. Perhaps the translation matrix malfunctioned. Crix replayed the message. The human female's words were clear, her tone almost casual. There was no fear in her voice, no desperation. If anything, she sounded amused. "Sir, how do you wish to proceed?" his weapons officer asked. Crix hesitated. Standard protocol called for immediate destruction of non-compliant forces, but something about the human's response troubled him. It suggested a confidence that made no tactical sense. Were they hiding something? Some secret weapon or alliance? "Begin long-range bombardment," he ordered finally. "Target their shield generators first. Perhaps when they see the futility of resistance, they'll reconsider." The first wave of Zephyrian plasma bolts lanced through space, striking New Geneva's shields with tremendous force. The station shuddered, emergency lighting flickering as power systems strained. But the shields held, reinforced by modifications Torres had implemented using the asteroid field's natural formations. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening under bombardment, the station began to change. Massive mining drones, repurposed as kamikaze units, swarmed toward the Zephyrian fleet. Industrial fabricators launched clouds of metallic chaff that interfered with targeting systems. Most shocking of all, sections of the asteroid field itself began to move, revealing that the humans had somehow turned entire asteroids into mobile weapons platforms. "What are they doing?" Crix demanded as his sensors registered the impossible tactical situation unfolding. His science officer, a young Zephyrian named Vex, studied the readings with growing amazement. "Sir, they appear to be using their mining and construction equipment as weapons. But this isn't standard military doctrine. There's no coordination, no unified battle plan. Each human seems to be improvising." As if to prove his point, a mining barge suddenly accelerated toward a Zephyrian destroyer, its cargo hold filled with explosives. The destroyer's weapon systems, calibrated for military targets, failed to register the industrial vessel as a threat until too late. The explosion sent shockwaves through both fleets. For the first time in his career, Admiral Crix felt something he had never experienced in battle: uncertainty. These humans were fighting like no species he had ever encountered. There was no surrender protocol, no tactical retreat when faced with superior firepower. Instead, they seemed to be making up their strategy as they went along, turning every piece of equipment, every resource, every desperate idea into a weapon. "Sir," Vex reported, his voice filled with scientific fascination despite the chaos around them, "I'm detecting something unusual in the human neural patterns we're scanning. Their stress hormones are elevated, but not in the way we'd expect from a species facing extinction. Instead, they're showing patterns associated with excitement, creative problem-solving." Crix's reptilian features twisted in confusion. "You're saying they're enjoying this?" "Not enjoying, sir, but they're not responding with despair or panic. They're responding with innovation." As the battle raged on, the Zephyrian fleet found itself facing an enemy unlike any in their extensive military history. Humans who turned garbage into guided missiles, who used construction equipment as siege weapons, who seemed to view overwhelming odds not as a reason to surrender, but as an interesting challenge to overcome. The tide of battle was far from decided, but one thing was becoming clear to Admiral Crix and his forces. They had encountered a species that didn't just lack a surrender protocol. They seemed to lack the very concept of surrender itself. The revelation. 3 days into what Admiral Crix had expected to be a brief demonstration of force, the Zephyrian fleet found itself locked in the most frustrating military engagement in Imperial history. New Geneva Station not only survived but seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. The humans had turned their entire asteroid field into a maze of defensive positions, mobile weapons platforms, and deadly surprises. Dr. Elena Vasquez had become the station's chief of unconventional warfare, a title that would have amused her before the crisis began. Her laboratory had transformed into a workshop where scientific equipment became weapons of war. She had discovered that Zephyrian shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, were vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies that she could generate using modified medical scanners. The beauty of it, she explained to Captain Chen during a brief respite, is that they're so technologically advanced, they can't adapt to our primitive solutions. Their computers keep trying to analyze our attacks using their military databases, but we're not in their databases. We're making this up as we go. Meanwhile, Commander Torres had organized the station's security personnel and volunteers into guerrilla units that operated throughout the asteroid field. They used maintenance tunnels, mining shafts, and construction equipment to stage hit-and-run attacks that left the Zephyrian forces bewildered. Torres had served in enough conflicts to recognize when an enemy was fighting by a rulebook, and the Zephyrians were definitely fighting by a rulebook. "They move in perfect formations," he reported to Sarah. "They follow doctrine. They maintain communication protocols. They do everything exactly as they were trained, which makes them predictable. Every time they send a squadron to investigate one of our positions, I know exactly how they'll approach, exactly what tactics they'll use." The psychological impact on the Zephyrian forces was becoming evident. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of star systems were now jumping at shadows, afraid of mining equipment that might suddenly sprout weapons, terrified of debris fields that could conceal human ambush teams. Morale reports reaching Admiral Crix painted a picture of an increasingly demoralized fleet. But it was the arrival of the Galactic Council's scientific survey ship that changed everything. Dr. Fane, a Centaurian xenobiologist and one of the Council's leading experts on species psychology, had been monitoring the conflict with growing fascination. When his ship reached the system, he immediately requested permission to study the human behavioral patterns. "Admiral Crix," Dr. Fane transmitted, his insectoid features clicking with excitement, "I must speak with you urgently. This conflict has revealed something unprecedented about human psychology." Reluctantly, Crix agreed to receive the scientist aboard his flagship. Dr. Fane arrived with a wealth of data, brain scans, psychological profiles, and biological analyses that painted an extraordinary picture. "Admiral, in all my years studying galactic species, I have never encountered anything like human neurology," Dr. Fane began, his multiple eyes glittering with scientific enthusiasm. Every known intelligent species possesses what we call a surrender protocol, a biological imperative that triggers submission behaviors when faced with overwhelming odds. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. Crix leaned forward, his interest piqued. And humans? Humans appear to lack this mechanism entirely, Dr. Thame replied, his excitement barely contained. Where other species experience despair and submission when facing impossible odds, humans experience what can only be described as a challenge response. Their brains literally rewire themselves to find solutions, to adapt, to overcome. The worse their situation becomes, the more creative and determined they become. That's impossible, Crix protested. No species could survive without surrender protocols. They would fight themselves to extinction. Exactly, Dr. Thane exclaimed. And yet here they are, thriving across dozens of star systems. Do you know what the humans call this trait? They have a saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. They've actually made a virtue of their biological inability to surrender. The implications hit Crix like a physical blow. Every military strategy, every conquest, every expansion of the Zephyrian Empire had been based on the assumption that defeated enemies would eventually surrender. But if humans couldn't surrender, if they were biologically incapable of submission, how do you defeat an enemy that cannot surrender? Crix whispered, more to himself than to Dr. Thane. Perhaps, the scientist suggested gently, the question is not how to defeat them, but whether defeating them is the right approach. As if summoned by their conversation, a new transmission arrived from New Geneva Station. This time, it wasn't Captain Chen who appeared on screen, but Dr. Vasquez, her face smudged with grease and her hair disheveled from days of continuous work. Admiral Crix, she began, her voice hoarse but determined. I understand you're a military leader, and military leaders think in terms of victory and defeat. But I'm a scientist, and scientists think in terms of problems and solutions. You have a problem, and we might have a solution. Crix found himself leaning forward despite his skepticism. Speak. You want this sector. We want to live and work here. These don't have to be mutually exclusive goals. Dr. Vasquez paused, consulting notes scrawled on her hand. We've been analyzing your technology during our little disagreement here. Your ships, your weapons, your systems. They're impressive, but they're designed for conquest, not exploration or development. Your point? Crix demanded. Our point is that we're good at different things. Captain Chen's voice interjected as she moved into view. You're good at military coordination, at establishing order, at managing large-scale operations. We're good at innovation, at adaptation, at solving problems that don't have obvious solutions. Dr. Vasquez nodded enthusiastically. What if, instead of trying to destroy each other, we work together? You get a sector full of humans who can turn asteroid fields into defensive networks and mining equipment into weapons. We get protection and access to your advanced technology. Everyone wins. The proposal was so unexpected, so completely outside standard military doctrine, that Crix found himself speechless. In all his years of conquest, no defeated enemy had ever suggested partnership. Of course, he realized with growing understanding, these humans weren't defeated. They couldn't be defeated in any traditional sense. You're suggesting an alliance? He asked finally. We're suggesting evolution. Commander Torres interjected, appearing beside the two women. You've been conquering the galaxy using the same tactics for centuries because they worked against species that could be forced to surrender. But we can't surrender, Admiral. It's not that we want. We literally can't. Our brains don't work that way. So you can keep trying to destroy us, Captain Chen continued, and we'll keep finding new ways to survive and fight back. We'll turn every asteroid into a weapon, every piece of equipment into a tool of resistance. This war could go on for decades, and at the end of it, we'll still be here, still fighting, still refusing to give up. Or, Dr. Vasquez added with a tired smile, you could try something that no Zephyrian admiral has ever tried before. You could try working with a species that doesn't know how to quit. The bridge of Crix's flagship fell silent as the implications sank in. His tactical officers, his crew, his entire command structure was built around the concept of forcing surrender. But these humans were offering something unprecedented, willing cooperation from a species that could never be truly conquered. Dr. Fane's voice broke the silence. Admiral, from a xenobiological perspective, this could be the beginning of a new model for galactic expansion. Instead of conquest and subjugation, cooperative development using the unique strengths of different species. Crix stared at the screen where 3 humans waited for his response. 3 members of a species that had just taught the entire Zephyrian Empire a lesson about the difference between surrender and cooperation. They had faced annihilation and responded not with submission, but with innovation. They had turned a hopeless situation into an opportunity for something entirely new. Dr. Vasquez, Crix said finally, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. Captain Chen, Commander Torres, the Zephyrian Empire has spent centuries perfecting the art of conquest. Perhaps it is time we learned something new. The transmission ended with agreement to begin formal negotiations, but the real victory had already been won. Not by weapons or superior firepower, but by the simple, stubborn, magnificent human inability to know when they were beaten. As news of the unprecedented agreement spread throughout the galaxy, other species began to take notice. The humans, it seemed, had done something no one thought possible. They had changed the rules of galactic politics simply by refusing to surrender. In the months that followed, the human-Zephyrian partnership would become a model for cooperation that revolutionized interstellar relations. But aboard New Geneva Station, as Captain Sarah Chen looked out at the Zephyrian ships that had once threatened her home and now stood as allies, she couldn't help but smile. The universe had just learned something important about humanity. They didn't have a surrender protocol because they didn't need one. They had something better, an unshakable belief that there was always another way, always another solution, always another chance to turn the impossible into the inevitable. The galaxy would never be the same.